hat in the paintings of Paris-based artists at the turn of the 20th century was as dominant as it was on the Parisian streets. This is hardly surprising given the momentum in fashion development at the time. By 1900, Paris boasted fashion houses of Paquin, Doucet, Worth, Lanvin, and Poiret. A modiste, or a hat maker, was a respectable profession that could enjoy a rich clientele, with high fashion houses encouraging collaborations with high-end milliners. With Paris dictating fashion terms to the rest of Europe, the hat became a symbol of feminine aesthetic. The accessibility and popularization of fashion media made sketches and photographs of hatted women the visual norm, to which women aspired on a daily basis, giving rise to the concept of the Parisienne. The Parisienne promoted an especially modern and French type of urban woman associated with the city as the cultural, fashion, and commercial epicenter. While artists captured images of hatted women both in portraits and in the scenes of urban public spaces, it is the hat's infiltration of the female nude genre that is most poignant of the significance of the hat in the image of the woman during the Belle Epoque. As Kenneth Clark suggests in his classic text, The Nude, A Study of Ideal Form, in the genre of the nude, we do not wish to imitate, we wish to perfect. That is to say, a group of naked bodies does not necessarily inspire empathy that results in a work of art. Instead, the artist's desire is to aestheticize the naked body in order to communicate his vision. Julie Taylor in Modernism and Affect suggests that modernism is driven by aesthetic that is not obvious in the real world. It stems from exploration of techniques as an expression of a vision hidden underneath our perception of reality. This agrees with Clark's suggestion that the nude is an abstraction on the theme of the naked woman, an experimentation platform in modernist art. In the age where haute couture became an art form, the hat embodied perhaps the most powerful and the most malleable object of fashion aesthetic. Arsène Alexandre, early 20th century art critic and fashion writer, argued that the hat is the complement and the crowning glory of the dress. Its paramount flair. This crowning glory, incorporated in the quintessential genre of art, creates a symbolic union of fashion and art, binding the woman and the hat into an aesthetic whole, where one cannot exist without the other. It is impossible to discuss a hatted female nude without looking at the work of Kees van Dongen. Unlike other Forbes, who often used bold contours and colors to portray landscapes, Van Dongen sought inspiration in the city life and the pleasures it had to offer. His hatted nudes are a liberal expression of a woman's sexuality and her obsession with fashion. And what better way of highlighting the public obsession with fashion than in a studio portrait of a woman in the nude? Characterized by a minimal background, Van Dongen's nudes, like his portraits, are staged compositions, free from distractions of backdrops, direct and confrontational. By keeping the woman's face in the shadow of her giant hat, the focus is brought down onto her body, where the artist uses thick brushstrokes to emphasize patches of light bouncing off her skin. The provocatively placed buckle on the scarf encourages the viewer's eye to drop down and then to lift up again, only to meet her defiant gaze. Yet the increased sense of nudity does not diminish her power over the viewer. On the contrary, she is statuesque, composed, when the boldness of the green paint complements the directness in her gaze. The hat, which seems to extend beyond the canvas, is decorated with a green bird. Bird designs served as a status symbol, with milliners competing for the biggest impression made. But Van Dongen merely suggests the decoration, leaving out the details, as if not to break the gaze of his sitter. This nude's imposing hat displays just enough detail to become the crowning glory that Arsène Alexandre wrote about, elevating and empowering this nude. In a way, the hat allows her to be more than she is without it, through a new modernist aesthetic. The nude has often been analyzed in terms of an object-subject formula, whereby a nude is a passive object and the artist or the viewer, an active subject imposing a meaning onto the nude. Similarly, the perception of a woman's decorative nature, discussed in many writings by Tamar Garb, lends itself to the expectation of fashion and jewelry, emphasizing the traditional decorative character of a woman, intended to entice. Such is arguably the case with Nude or chapeau noir. Jeweled necklace, large hat, and painted lips convey the superimposed refinement associated with a woman's image during the Belle Epoque. However, the irregularities of the brushwork on her body suggest that she is not meant to be seen as a perfect symbol of the feminine. Rather, she appears as a fragile, imperfect, and delicate human whose hatted head gives a glimpse of the facade that she wears in public. The struggle between the public and the private exposes the fragility of the sitter, hidden underneath the fashionable exterior meticulously layered by social conventions. The irregular contours of the torso are unidealized in the classical sense. Van Dongen adds a few strokes of dirty green to convey a few shadows. Unceremoniously, he outlines her private parts, leaving the lower part of the painting in stark contrast with the top. What can easily be written off as Van Dongen's sexual liberationism actually demonstrates an insight into the social expectation placed on women at the time, captured through instinctive honesty of new artistic expression. The chapeau noir is a symbol in itself, or the black hat. Black was becoming a fashionable color, and haute couture hats such as the one by Paul Poiret here were growing in size over the first decade of the 20th century. A vision of elegance permeated through art, printed media, fashion magazines, and photographs from public events. At the same time, the portrayal of a woman's face obscured by her hat is a recurring example in Van Dongen's oeuvre. La Parisienne from 1910 captures the height of the fashion craze by leaving the woman as merely a mannequin for his symbolic depiction of the typically Parisian fashionista. As she towers over the minuscule dog, she echoes another French symbol of modernity, the Eiffel Tower. In a public setting that is almost as manicured as she is, she embodies what the 19th century French journalist Taxil Delors defined as a myth, a fiction, and a symbol found in all places where women show themselves with grace, distinction, and spirited elegance. Thus, the hat essentially replaces the face, able to make a stronger point than the woman herself. Historically, the most provocative and controversial paintings have been those in which the nude holds a direct gaze with the viewer. We cannot accuse Van Dongen of making his nude too direct, yet her allure is heightened by the mystery of her face, while the myth that Taxil Delors refers to is emphasized by her hat. Logically, the hat is the last thing that one would expect to put on, and the first thing to remove when undressing. So the hatted nude represents an unnatural state. Yet the woman and the hat form an inseparable entity, where one does not exist without the other. The hat needs the woman to fulfill its purpose, while the woman is essentially incomplete without it in the contemporary conventions of the Belle Epoque, and unable to perform her role. The performative aspect of the hat aptly echoes the models used by Van Dongen. At the heart of Montmartre, the artists had access to women who modeled, danced, and performed on a regular basis. What looks like scattered clothing around this seated nude in nu à la chaise is not an emphasis of her nudity, but a suggestion of a change of state between dress and undress. They echo the artificial colors and the intoxication of the Parisian nightlife, which excited the artist, while the rough brushwork prevents them from taking attention away from the nude. The makeup, the intensely blue hair, and the hat highlight her state of undress. As before, the artist does not bother to specify the hat's details, or even to paint it in its entirety, which points to the symbolic performative function of the hat, which has essentially become an anatomical extension of the body. While hatted women were already a common subject for the Impressionists, the hatted nude is a more modern subject, rarely seen in the works of artists prior to the turn of the century. In this much softer portrayal by Auguste Renoir from 1892, the artist observes the model without confronting her. He almost protectively obstructs the view of the spectator with the hat and the long hair cascading down her back, and his brush strokes obscure her outlines. Her sun hat, decorated with a big red ribbon, enhances her youthful appearance, while the animated design of the hat seems to pull more towards the innocent play of a girl than the sexuality of a woman. This nude by Amedeo Modigliani could not be more opposite to Renoir's portrayal. Renoir captured the fleeting moment of life in the fleeting brushstrokes of Impressionism. Modigliani responded to the symbolic aesthetic and its permeating image of the femme fatale. He believed in the notion of an artist as a superman who imposes his eccentric views on the world. So, a true modernist. A complex and uncommitted character, he embodied many social identities and fitted easily into different cultures and settings. The artist's views of women varied just as widely, from religious and sacrificial to humanist and carnal. He saw Montmartre through the eyes of a romantic, with the eccentric mix of characters, and he had the ability to evoke the internal world of his sitter with only a few lines. His hatted nude may not be the provocative seductress of Van Dongen, but much like Modigliani himself, she is open, direct, and even if somewhat reserved. Her hair is layered high, as fashion dictated for supporting a large hat. As in Van Dongen's images, the hat is only partially visible. But perhaps the artist doesn't need to show the full design to make his point. Whatever the decoration, it symbolizes a layer of theatricality over the exposed and tired woman, distancing the viewer from reality through ornamentation. This delightful portrayal by Jacqueline Marval, although dated later than the other works discussed, celebrates the nightlife that continually inspired Van Dongen and his contemporaries. Marval, who worked in fashion before committing to painting, was praised by critics as a modern painter and became known for her elegant forme féminine. The enormous skirt of La Danseuse, covered in rosettes, is complemented by the bright, wide-brimmed hat uncharacteristic for the 1920s. As the dancer's crossed arms seem to grow into the layers of her giant skirt, they also frame her bare breasts. The hat here forms part of the costume and completes the essential elements of the erotic fantasy. Its role is to enhance theatricality and to remove the viewer from reality. An image from the 1906 issue of Même Modèle echoes Marval's painting in its posed and theatrical partial nudity. The chic setting is of decorated tapestry and animal skins emphasizes the luxuriousness of the interior, while the model's semi-reclined pose attempts to evoke the natural in this unnatural staging of a fantasy. The persistence of the hat in both images highlights the necessity of ornamentation in the creation of the fantasy and the subsequent removal of the viewer from reality. The confronting image of a hatted nude positioned against a minimalist backdrop and often locking gaze with the spectator feels a bit like risque portraiture. The more comfortable interior setting gives the viewer the feeling of looking in on the nude, not unlike the feeling of looking in through the keyhole in Edgar Degas' images of unaware bathers. Perhaps when placed in the setting of interior, the hat appears more natural on a naked woman, particularly when surrounded by other items of identifiable clothing and furniture. The artificial luxuriousness is in Philip Wilson Steer's seated nude is closer to the bustle of city life and the opulence associated with it than the symbolic bareness of the studio portraits of the avant-gardists. This nude is at peace in the privacy of the room and growing into her settings. The whiteness of her skin glows stronger under the light falling from the left, while her decorated hat shields her face and redirects the focus onto her body. Stier's nudes were inspired by French artists, perhaps Degas himself, and were associated with contemporary interiors. However, this painting of a certain Miss Geary was never exhibited because a friend advised Stier that it was improper to show a nude in a hat. Indeed, there seem to be no images of hatted nudes in the photographic media of the early 20th century. A risque magazine Mais Modèles, which focused on artistic nudes, sometimes printed photographs of models fashionably clothed in contrast with their images in the nude. Yet the hatted nude remained the domain of avant-garde painters as a groundbreaking and controversial aesthetic. The juxtaposition of the public and the private conveyed in the interior setting of Charles Guérin painting perhaps more explicitly captures the strangeness of a hatted nude that so concerned Stier's friend. The longing for the natural, suggested in the hat's decorations of feathers and grapes, is conflicted with the cornered setting of the staged composition. The crowding furniture, picture frame behind the woman, and the clothes beside her are pictured in details with no attempt to distract the viewer from the setting. Unchallenged by her gaze, we are free to observe the most vulnerable of the nudes considered here. She is more a woman than a symbol. The artificiality of this private interior feels rather public, with the naturalistic detail emphasizing her nudity rather than allowing to focus on the hatted nude as a genre itself. Only artists, it seems, venture into the exploration of the hatted nude. With modern art, the nude transcends its traditional form in order to become more human, more real, more desiring of the world around her, even if it risks becoming less desirable herself for losing her idealized aesthetic under the modernist brush. In her unnatural state, the hatted nude confronts the viewer, questioning the boundary between fantasy and reality in the search for an alternative aesthetic.